Eu sou Adriana Bittar.
I am Adriana Bittar, journalist, and I will be presenting the program of this event. It is a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much for being here. A special thanks to all the authorities here in this room and everyone that is following us via platform. PPP Americas is an event organized by the IDB Group, one of the main funding sources for development in Latin America and Caribbean. The IDB Group has as a mission to improve people's lives, providing financial solutions and development know-how for clients in the public and private sectors. It is comprised by IDB that has been working with governments for over 60 years, IDB Invest, and IDB Lab, which tests innovative fashions to promote inclusive development. This event also has the support of the administration of the state of São Paulo, European Union, and a whole set of sponsors that helped us in putting together this event. In these 2 days, PPP Americas is gathering the main agents in the public and private sectors in the development of infrastructure and services in Latin America and the Caribbean, with the purpose to debate about challenges and new trends in projects structuring in all sectors and the best practices in project funding, as well as investors' attraction. And for the first time, this event is being held in a hybrid format. We have in-person participants here in the headquarters of the State of São Paulo administration, and many who are with us remotely via online platform, which can be accessed at urlpppamericas.com. In addition to all the details for our programming, this platform also has virtual rooms so that you can improve and increase your network of contacts and talk to the participants of this event. This year, as you can see, PPP Americas is interactive, so do send your questions via platform. Questions, comments, you can send them straight to panelists and moderators. Over the day, several panels and presentations will be happening simultaneously here on this stage. For those of you that are online, you should choose the desired track in the menu of the platform, and those of you that are here in this room will be using the audio equipment such as this one that you have received. If you need any help, please ask our support team to guide you. We have simultaneous interpreting for Portuguese, English, and Spanish on the online platform. You can choose the language in the menu that is located in the top left corner of your screen. And of course, everyone's safety is our priority. That's why we are following the recommendations of health agency authorities to prevent COVID-19. Everyone that is here do have full vaccination, and they must abide by all safety protocols. We will start our program now with a panel, COVID-19 and PPPs, Challenges and Solutions. Just as they had contracts affected by effects of pandemic, PPPs in Latin America and Caribbean also will be the key to leave this crisis. Considering that scenario, it is urgent to reflect about the past works and project the near future when more than ever tax balance and infrastructure development. I would like to bring to the floor IDB's representative in Brazil, Mr. Morgan Doyle. Executive Secretary of Partnership of Strategic Actions and Projects, Ms. Gabriela Engler. Welcome. The Director of Concessions in Brazil of Vence Airport, Mr. Thierry Bassi. Welcome, Mr. Thierry. Also here on this panel remotely, the VP of the government for Caixa Econômica Federal, Tatiana Tomé, and the partner and head of infrastructure in Brazil of Patria Investments, Felipe Pinto. Welcome. Welcome you all to this panel. Now I turn the floor to Mr. Morgan, who will be the moderator. Thank you very much, Adriana. Welcome all of you to this panel, COVID-19 and PPPs, Challenges and Solutions. Thank you for being with us today. I'm very happy to have here such important experts on this topic for a crucial debate. As all of us here know, PPPs will be crucial to improve capacity of investment in infrastructure, therefore contributing to drive sustainable growth in the post-pandemic world, and also to favor a number of advancements in regional integration with digitization and creating more climatic resilience, which are in fact some central elements of our objectives for 2025. So I'm eager to hear our panelists, your experience as you were at the forefront of the PPPs, operating the essential works operating in despite of all the pandemic impacts. Before we start, I would like to stress that this panel is going to be held fully in Portuguese. So for those of you who would like to hear it in another language, please choose the language that you wish to hear this panel on, English or Spanish. On behalf of IDB, I would like to thank the São Paulo State Administration that has received us here in the Palácio dos Bandeirantes, and also the federal government and the European Union that is supporting this event, and of course our panelists who will share with us their experiences. Thank you very much. I would like to start by thanking Secretary Gabriela Engler. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Your experience in the program of concessions in São Paulo, it's very valuable to us. I also would like to recognize Thierry Besset, who is in one of the most affected sectors, which was the port areas. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Also, Tatiana Tomé is with us. From Caixa Econômica Federal, a very relevant entity for PPPs, one of our partners. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Tatiana, and Felipe Pinto from Patria Investments. And this is a fund that was just awarded a very emblematic concession here in São Paulo. And they are also partners. It's an honor to have you with us. So thank you all for being with us. So to start with some context, the challenges that came with the pandemic created the need of adjusting. And then we have several learnings that are valuable for everyone that is here with us now. For instance, we have the capacity of bringing together people from all over the world in order to share knowledge with us today, and this is wonderful. But in addition to that, we also saw the need to adjust the contracts, to adapt them to the lower demands or other situations that happened in over these almost 2 years. In the panel today, we'll be hearing from several adjustments that were needed facing this challenging scenario. So I am sure that your experience will provide a very rich experience. At the end of this panel, we will have someone from the government, a main player, bank in the PPPs, a key player in one of the most affected areas in the pandemic, which is the port area, and also other representatives. We have a very important representative from each one of the areas of this full ecosystem. So really, I thank you so much for being here with us. I am sure that all these learnings will be very relevant from now on when the pandemic is over. And, well, let's hope that this happens very soon. I believe these learnings will be helpful for everyone because, in fact, we know that all this region needs more investments. our publication, Development in Americas, highlights that the region only invested 2.8% of its GDP in the last 8 years, and this is much lower than what is needed, and emerging countries are investing the double amount of that. So we need to increase that, and we will need an effective participation of the private sector. So how to bring together the legal safety and these projects, and that's what we will be discussing now. And I think one of the keys will be the preparation of sound contracts that have the right allocation and management of risks. And we from IDB get very excited about bringing to the table several players to share this practical knowledge. So this is what PPP Americas is about, and I am really grateful to all of you. So just another message for everyone that is here in Brazil. We have here in the panel a program that is free. This is a PPP course for Brazil. It is in Portuguese. That is for Brazilians. So feel free to register and to take this course. We understand this is very important once you can know even more, and it's important to share the knowledge and the technology about the tool and what the tool can offer. So let's start. Please, I would like to start by Gabriela Engler, the Partnership Executive Secretary. So first, I would like to understand the efforts of the PPPs during this pandemic. So first question, your CV really stands out because you have two master's degree, one here, one in Colombia, several articles that you published on infrastructure, and also championing partnerships in the state of São Paulo. So among the many impacts from the pandemic, can you tell us about some of the measures that São Paulo administration has taken in terms of the PPPs? Perfect. Yes. Good morning, everyone. Morgan, Tatiana, Felipe, Thierry, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be here today. I was privileged to represent the state of São Paulo and PPP Americas in the state in 2019, and I was a subsequent host of the event. That was an honor for me. And well, hardly did I know about all the challenges that we would face in the following years. And I think it's a major achievement to be here today in a hybrid event, allowing these meetings to happen again. I would like to thank Carolina and Gaston and all our team in the state of São Paulo, especially Ricardo, that made this event possible. So talking about your question, Morgan, I think I should start by mentioning the main impacts of the pandemic in our program. I would say that we dove into a sea of uncertainties. In the beginning of 2020, we had already worked throughout the whole year structuring projects, and we were ready for a mature pipeline, one auction, one bid after another, and then the pandemic hit. So we had two immediate effects. The first one was to postpone the biddings, either because of some practical issues. The world was closed, it was in lockdown, people could not visit and study the assets, and this really did not allow us to follow the original schedule, or we had to go back to the table and review our studies. So that really was a greater impact. We had to reassess the feasibility studies that were ready at the time. So in this uncertainty context, the state asked itself, how could we mitigate the context, a more resilient contracts in order to face such a difficult moment? And I should highlight two of our activities then. The first one was to review the feasibility studies facing the new macroeconomic assumptions. We reviewed the demand studies, CapEx studies that had input that were linked to dollars, and also other projects that were linked to commodities that had significant prices variations. So that activity already was very time consuming. It was frustrating to have to do that, but we did. We sat down and we were able to go back to the studies and adjust them to the new reality. And in addition to that, we started thinking about contract arrangements that would be more robust to face risks that were heightened because of the pandemic. And I will give you a few quick examples. The first of them was the demand risk. This was very much discussed. We tried to develop contract mechanisms to mitigate this risk. Yesterday, Tarsila, in the opening of the event, mentioned the project of lines 8 and 9. We developed a premium band of demand protection in the first year of the contract to face to bring in a quick and firm response to the pandemic. But also we launched projects with FX protection so that the bankability of the projects could be safe in addition to the traditional funding options. This was needed for a number of projects. The train among cities went to a call for tender with that mechanism of FX protection. And finally, I would like to mention contract arrangements that provide liquidity mechanisms to the contract if there are critical imbalances. And we already had that before the pandemic, and Felipe knows PPP project. We had that idea, but basically here we had to develop contracts that could tackle adversities endogenously, that is, to solve the problems by themselves. So mechanisms that create liquidity reserves to face these critical imbalances of the contract. In summary, these were the main topics that we developed and were able to mature over this period. And in the next round, I'll tell you more about our lessons learned. Well, I thank you. Very interesting. Very specific and very relevant for our topics here. Well, to move forward, now talking about the government, I would like to turn the floor to Tatiana Tomé. She is the Vice President of Caixa Econômica Federal. Tatiana, you have a sound and long trajectory at Caixa, and also a recognized academic work with master's and PhD, and you have been asked to help the federal administration in the PPP. So in the last few months, how Caixa, with this very important and relevant work in PPPs, adapted to act and to face the difficulties stemming from the pandemic in terms of the PPP's contracts and concession contracts as well. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for this invitation. I would like to greet Morgan and all the members of this panel. Yes, in fact, PPPs for Caixa is a new subject because we started working on the end of 2018 structuring PPPs. As Morgan mentioned, I work the Secretariat of the Partnership Programs in the Federal Administration when that Secretariat was created. And I came back to Caixa with this idea of Caixa working as a structuring agent of projects. This because we have a technical competence that is very strong. We have 2,000 engineers and architects that work with the cities, with the towns, and they follow up infrastructure projects and housing projects that come from transfers from the federal administration to the cities. So we combined the experience that we already have in this sector of technology and infrastructure with this will of working in partnership with the cities and towns and contributing to this agenda of good projects. We started working in 2019. And as Gabriela said, we already had mature projects when the pandemic hit. We chose to start working in public lighting because these are simpler projects in terms of structuring and that already have a significant impact in towns, both environmentally as well as in terms of safety and modernization to our cities. We started working with public lighting. Our first project to be available for bidding happened in August of 2020, which was right in the middle of the pandemic. And our question, as Gabriela mentioned, was, would our project have an impact in terms of demand of the risk matrix? And we saw that it not, because the public lighting was not affected by the pandemic. So our first uncertainty was regarding the auction. So our first auction was in Aracaju, and Feira de Santana, and Franco da Rocha. So a project in Sergipe, a project in Bahia, and a project in São Paulo of a smaller town. So this was a full package at B3 of these three auctions, and we were successful. We had around 12 participants, 12 bidders for the project. So we did have interesting discounts. And in spite of the pandemic, our contract model, or a model of contract allowed us to bring attractiveness to the private sector, which came in, and we already see the results of these projects because the capex was estimated for the first year and a half. We were going to switch all lights to LED and also change the management system. And out of these three projects, we see that the city is already changed and the project is going very well. This is very important to see that the structuring agency needs to follow up and see how the project is being carried out and, possibly change anything if needed. So what have we seen with the challenges of the pandemic? We then had a second round of auctions, Belém and Sapucaia do Sul. And by the end of November, we had another auction in November in Campinas, and in November, actually next week, we are going to have another one in Patos de Minas. So we saw that the public lighting, we had a successful agenda in spite of the pandemic. Of course, we did have additional challenges with the pandemics because we had to hold meetings with the city administration. We had to approve the project with the legislature, and everyone had to adapt to this new way of working. And this is a challenge. It delays things a little bit because people have to get used to distance working. But it was good. It was a good period in spite of the pandemic. And then I would like to say also that we had the IFC partnership in this public lighting projects, and IDBs also are partnering in some projects. We have 5 of them in partnership with IDB that will start seeing results in February. IDB is a partner with us with solid waste, public lighting, sanitation, and there is another one in nursery homes in Santa Catarina. So these are PPPs that are very innovative in the sector. The one that is already further ahead, the ones that we are working with IDB, is the Resinas project for solid waste. And also public lighting in Nova Lima. These are the ones that we are already a little bit more far ahead, and very soon we'll be publishing the notice. So just as Morgan mentioned in the beginning, here we have representatives from all the ecosystem. And what I usually say is that in order to be successful in these projects and structuring these projects, we also had a number of partners, and that's why we were successful. We have the federal government with the fund for project structuring that is financing these projects, Caixa, another structuring arm using part of the project with external consulting services. We have the multilateral agencies supporting us, and we have the city administrations also willing to help and train and follow up the execution of the contract. So I think the success really depends upon this set of players and partners working together. I think that's it. We have not faced that many problems as Gabriela. We did not have to change any of our studies, but we did have the challenges of the remote work.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting, and it also has a sectorial element, and that really matters. And I agree that our partnership is driving these frontiers with more innovative solutions. And I think this is very favorable for the whole ecosystem, because we have to have increased private investment to drive citizen or services for citizens, and that's what drives us all. Now, let's hear about who was at the front line generating contracts, managing dropping demand. Case of Vinci Airport or Vinci. I don't know, Thierry, you can tell us how we pronounce that. I still have a question about that. Now, in addition to this experience, you worked for the São Paulo state government, coordinating PPPs, concessions, just like the Line 6 of the underground. That was an essential milestone for the state and the country. And now you are working for Vinci, that manages airports not only in Brazil, but in Chile, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic. Could you, if you could only look at Brazil, the international airport in Salvador, and now I wish to congratulate you for the other lot you have just won in the northern region. Could you please explain us how you worked at that such important moment with the impacts of the pandemic over airports? Good morning, Morgan. Good morning, Gabriela, Tatiana, Felipe, and colleagues present here in person and both virtually. Thank you very much for the invitation. And as you have said, Morgan, our sector, the transportation sector, was by far the hardest hit by the COVID pandemic. And we operate 16 airports in the region, one in Chile, one in Costa Rica, 6 in the Dominican Republic. Altogether, we have 53 airports in 12 countries. Now, talking more specifically about the Brazilian case, during the pandemic, we were only operating Salvador, and we shall start operating the Amazon airport next year. We could approach this under two standpoints. From the operating standpoint, during the peak of the pandemic, demand dropped by 97%. So an airport that received over 100 flights a day started receiving 3 after a few days. A huge hit, and I'm talking about one of the largest airports in Brazil. And I'd like to make a favorable comment about the Civil Aviation Federal Agency that had a fundamental or has a fundamental role to play in coordinating airports, handling, shipping, etc. This agency had a very active role in order to, or has a very active role in order to ensure connectivity. So we had the so-called the essential mesh or network, so that all Brazilian states could still receive flights. That's very important to supply remote regions, just like the Amazon region, and then inputs to fight the pandemic. So the SAC role was very essential, and it is today a world reference. Now, from the contractual standpoint, despite the difficulties of the pandemic, we had a very positive experience. The Brazilian Federal Civil Aviation Agency, ANAC, together with the Infrastructure Ministry, organized a task force in order to rebalance these contracts. We had to comply with the contracts in a very short deadline, so we had ANAC technicians together with the Brazilian federal attorney in order to ensure the solvency of companies. So it was a major effort conducted last year, and the contracts were balanced before the end of the year, and that allowed to reduce the payments of the reimbursement of part of our grant. So as a result, our concession, from both operating and contractual standpoints, the Brazilian federal government played a very active role, and I think it should be seen as an example. It was the first restriking or rebalancing that Vinci received all over the world. So I'd like to make a very favorable comment about the Brazilian stance, given the hard hit of the company. Oh, this is a very relevant example, and the fact that you had to face that 97% drop in demand, I bet it was a very concerning moment. Thank you very much for sharing, and for sharing ANAC's reaction in such a critical moment. Here we see the importance of the public sector to keep up the ecosystem up and working in order to fight these exogenous elements. Thierry. I don't know how you still pronounce Vinci, but anyway. What about this pandemic period for the investors in PPP and concessions? I'd like to hear from Felipe, who was in charge of developing cargo business in South America for many years, and has an overall vision of the continent. And in addition to that, he has worked in France, so he has a global vision as a partner at Patria that has a very diversified portfolio, investment portfolio in Brazil. I'm sure that you monitored all the experience very closely. So from your standpoint, which were the challenges you faced during the pandemic? Thank you, Morgan. Thank you. And thank you very much for the invitation. I'd like to greet Morgan, Thierry, Gabriela, and all the present, all the attendees. I wish to apologize for not being with you in person. You know, the end of the year is always very busy, and it's not different for us. Today we have a very special event, which is the annual call with our investors that will happen immediately after this panel. So I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you. But once again, thank you very much for the invitation. Well, it was a very bumpy period, to say the least. We were faced with very uncommon, very rare situations, and they required a lot of flexibility on our part, on the part of regulators and financiers, investors. Stepping back for a moment, for those who are not familiar with Patria, we invest heavily in infrastructure. We are just investors in Latin America. We manage $75 billion only earmarked for equity in Latin America, and we invest in all infrastructure sectors with a very diversified portfolio, 5 highways in Latin America, 3 in Brazil and 2 in Colombia. We are the largest hydro waterways investors, and we have a fundamental partnership with the IDB, with the Hidrovia Paraná-Paraguay waterway. We operate offshore platforms, and we have almost 40 ships. We invest in energy transmission, renewable energies or energy sources. We invest in thermoelectric power plants. We invest in data infrastructure as well, telecoms, data centers, and we are developing a large desalination project in Chile. So when we look at PPPs and the COVID pandemic, we were faced with two very unique situations worth mentioning. First, we won the bid for the highway that we ended by calling it the SP axis. It's 1,300 kilometers. It crosses the heart of São Paulo state, and the auction happened in January 2020, immediately before the beginning of the pandemic, and we signed the contract after the beginning of the pandemic. So you can imagine the risk evaluation, and not only there was a financial risk. This is a highway that requires investment around 15 billion reals. So it was very challenging. It was very challenging for implementation without the pandemic. With the pandemic, we had to adapt very quickly. We had to work remotely. We had to solve financeability issues of the project. With the pandemic, how would we finance the project that required a financing of around 3 billion reals? And nobody knew how long the pandemic was going to last, by how much traffic. So we relied on the dedicated support of the São Paulo state government, who agreed with us in signing. First, they recognized, and by signing the contract, they realized, or they acknowledged, that COVID required an extraordinary rebalancing of the contract. That reassured us as equity managers, and also it reassured the investors, the financiers. So I think that was the first case of acknowledging the pandemic as a factor requiring contract rebalancing in the country, and that was done upon the signing of the contract. And thanks to this acknowledgement, we contracted a 3 billion real financing that was acknowledged this year as the project finance of the year by Latin Finance. It recognized not only the creative conditions of the financing, but also the fundamental protections. And one of them was the recognition of the pandemic as a factor to rebalance the contract on the part of the public sector. So it was a very tough moment. We didn't know how long the pandemic was going to last, and fortunately we had the support of São Paulo state government. I think this is a very important step. I think that now we are debating the amount of the rebalancing. This is a very important debate, and we need more agility on the part of the regulatory agency of São Paulo state. But another thing another difficult moment is that we invest in Colombia in the 5G highways. It determines co-generations. It has inaugurated 5G concession, and we won the first highway that gives access to Cali. It's called Malha Vial de Cali. When the pandemic hit, the Colombian authority ended by opening tolls. And in the case of 4G, the previous highways, the Colombian government ensured payment should traffic drop. There was no contract clause to protect 5G investors. In 5G investors, we didn't have the support of the government. Should we need contract rebalancing thanks to force majeure events, which was the case of COVID? But the Colombian government sat down with us and accepted these clause of rebalancing because of force majeure events just like COVID. So we have two favorable examples on the São Paulo state and by the Colombian government of flexibility. They were open for debate. It's very important to be able to rebalance contracts for the good health and long-term feasibility of this kind of investment, which is so important for society at large. Thank you very much, Felipe. Very interesting experiences you lived. And flexibility has been a common element and an enabler, and an enabling factor to attract capital investment in such relevant projects. Now let's have a second round of questions. Unfortunately, we don't have a timeless limit. We still have 15 minutes, so I'd like to ask the members of the panel to be brief and straightforward. But the question is the natural sequence based on what you said that has been your experience. Facing the impact of the pandemic. Which were the lessons learned? The changes that are here to stay. Which are the elements that will still be here in 2022 and onwards? Could you please be brief? Morgan, I think we can list 3 major lessons learned. The first one, private investment in infrastructure is of the essence, and there is no way back. It resisted, and in fact, it actually grew during the pandemic because people realized that in order to develop the country, we need private investment in infrastructure. That's a great lesson. And the pandemic made it very clear that it's past the point of no return. The second lesson, still a bit at micro level, is that there is no point assigning to concessionaires risks they can't control. This is obvious, but not always people realize that. I'm talking about a macro context. Just to give you an example. And shifting away from São Paulo state. When we look at the demand risk, which was highly debated or heatedly debated during the pandemic, if we look at Rio, for instance, with the underground and metropolitan urban trains, the concessionaire is compensated with no protection against dropping demand, and the impact of the pandemic was catastrophic. It doesn't work to assign this risk to the concessionaire, because the government has to be an universal insurer. So the idea that you should assign the risk to the concessionaire doesn't work. It goes back, it fires back. And here in São Paulo, we have matured a bit. I think we started on a more sophisticated basis. We have the compensation via technical fees dissociated from public fees, or we had a rule to share demand risk according to different ranges in existing mobility contracts. In 8 and 9 lines of the urban trains, we have this clause, and the intercity train has some services compensated by availability, recognizing that the demand risk exists, and we shouldn't put it or assign it to the concessionaire. When we go to other sectors or other industries, that should be slightly changed or adjusted. And the third major lesson, Morgan, is that we want competition in our auctions. And if we want that, we have to draw up contracts